The deadbolt slammed shut before anyone in the ballroom understood why. 12 men in catering whites set down their trays, in perfect unison. The string quartet's bow lifted off the strings mid-note, and never came back down. 200 faces turned toward the doors. The doors did not move. Somewhere in the back of the room, a crystal flute slipped from a manicured hand and shattered. No one looked down at it. A woman in emerald silks stood at the center of the marble floor, wine bleeding across her dress like a slow red wound. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had only stopped, one step from the exit, and gone very, very still. Outside, the rain kept falling on the Long Island shore. Inside, on the grand staircase, a single shadow began to descend, slow, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never in his life needed to run. He reached the landing, he looked at her, and The whispers came first, not loud, never loud. People like this never raised their voices when they could wound you quietly instead. A murmur here, a glance there, the soft clink of crystal against crystal. And underneath it, a sound Beatrix Halloran had learned to recognize before she ever turned 30, the sound of being measured, and found too large. She stood near the velvet curtains of the Ashford Ballroom on the Gold Coast of Long Island. In a gown the color of deep emerald silk, the fabric clung to her thick thighs, to her broad hips, to the soft curve of a stomach. She had stopped apologizing for a long time ago. She was fat. She knew it. She had known it her whole life, and she had learned slowly, painfully, to dress it with dignity. But dignity is a fragile thing in a room full of knives. Beatrix was 32 years old, an independent art appraiser. One of the best in the country, if you ask the right people. And the right people had asked for her plenty. She had authenticated works at Sotheby's. She had been trusted by collectors who didn't trust their own families. She had an eye, a real one. The kind you cannot buy or fake or inherit. She had earned every inch of her reputation. She had not earned this. Around her stood the women of the Ashford set. Razor-thin, hollow-cheeked, collarbones like blades under skin stretched too tight. They wore minimalist slips that looked like spun glass, and they moved like spun glass too. Brittle, cold, ready to shatter at the first sign of weakness. And there she was among them, soft, substantial, real a velvet cushion in a room full of broken diamonds. She hadn't wanted to come, but Gerald Ashford had insisted. He had acquired a painting, a Caravaggio, he said. $60 million, he said, and he wanted the woman who would authenticate it standing in his ballroom as a guest of honor, like a trophy, like proof that even the experts bowed to his money. Except Beatrix hadn't authenticated anything yet. That was the part nobody seemed to mention. She had been promised access to the painting tonight. A private viewing, a real examination. The host had been vague about the details, and she had been too professional to push, and now she stood here in a room that hated her, waiting for a chance to do the one thing she was actually good at. She just had to survive the party first. Across the floor, near a towering ice sculpture that was already starting to weep, stood Coraline Ashford, Gerald's daughter, 26. Beautiful in the way a sharpened thing is beautiful. She swirled champagne in a baccarat flute, and beside her stood a young man named Spencer Cole, a junior partner, a lawyer. The kind of lawyer who helped rich men take things from people who couldn't fight back, and who looked very proud of it. They saw her looking. Of course they did. Did she misunderstand the invitation? Coraline said. She did not lower her voice. That was the point. The cruelty was meant to travel. I thought this was a black tie gala, not a casting call for a bakery commercial. Laughter, a little chorus of it. Soft and ugly, Beatrix's fingers tightened around her clutch. She fixed her eyes on a tapestry hanging across the room, a Renaissance piece. Flemish, probably. She started counting threads in her head. The old trick, the one she had used since she was a girl, the one that turned panic into arithmetic. 1, 2, 3. "Look at those arms," Spencer said, louder now. Bolder, because no one had stopped them yet, and men like Spencer only ever got braver when no one stopped them. I'm honestly surprised the seamstress didn't run out of fabric. I mean, how much silk does it take to cover all that? Careful, Spence. A woman this time. Don't get too close. She looks hungry. More laughter. Beatrix kept counting. 4, 5. She had survived this her whole life. The sideways looks at restaurants. The diet advice from relatives who had not earned the right to give it. The whole exhausting science of being a large woman in a world that wanted her smaller. Quieter. Gone. This was just more of the same. Except it wasn't, because this was public. This was a room of 200 people. And this was an execution. She decided to leave, not flee. Leave, there is a difference. And the difference matters. And she held on to that difference like a railing as she turned toward the great oak doors. She would walk out. She would call a car. She would do the examination some other day, on her own terms. In a room that didn't smell like cruelty and champagne. She took a step, and that's when it happened. She would think about it later. The timing, how precise it was, how Coraline's elbow came up at exactly the right angle, how the full glass of dark Pinot Noir tipped at exactly the right moment, how it didn't feel like an accident at all. The wine hit her chest, cold, then her stomach, then her thighs. It soaked through the emerald silk instantly, spreading dark and ugly, a crimson stain blooming across the front of her like a wound. Beatrix gasped, stepped back, and Coraline screamed, "Oh my God!" Watch, the string quartet stopped. Just like that. Mid-note, the bow lifted off the strings and the room went silent. The silence had weight. You could feel it pressing on your skin. 200 faces turned. "You clumsy cow," Coraline shrieked, her voice cracking with fake outrage. "You almost ruined my heels, Beatrix looked down at her dress. The stain, the ruin of it. "I didn't. Just leave. Spencer now." Stepping up beside Coraline like a man stepping into a spotlight. "You don't belong here. You're making everyone uncomfortable. Go back to whatever buffet you crawled out of." And the laughter spread. Not just their little circle this time. It rippled outward, through the elites, through the hedge fund heirs and the surgeons' wives and the men who owned things they had never built. A wave of cruel amusement, rolling across the ballroom, and Beatrix stood at the center of it, soaked in wine, 32 years old, holding her clutch like it was the last solid thing in the world. Her chest tightened, a panic attack. She knew the feeling, the walls leaning in, the air going thin. She looked toward the doors. She just had to make the doors, and then a whistle cut the room in half. Sharp, piercing, not the kind of sound a guest makes. A soldier's sound, a command, a signal, and everything changed. 12 men dressed as catering staff set down their silver trays, all at once, in perfect unison. 8 men who had been standing along the walls in tuxedos, men everyone had assumed were the Ashfords' own security, moved with a terrifying kind of coordination, and the doors slammed shut. Both of them, 15 feet of mahogany, swinging closed with the force of a gunshot. The boom rolled through the ballroom and rattled the crystal, and then came another sound. Lower, heavier deadbolts. Steel ones. Engaging one after another with a series of synchronized clacks. The laughter died in 200 throats. Gerald Ashford pushed forward, his face flushing red. He was a big man gone soft. A man used to being the most important person in any room he paid for. And right now he looked like a man who had just realized he wasn't. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Guards, open those doors." Immediately, not one guard moved. They stood rigid, hands resting inside their jackets. Waiting, and then from the grand marble staircase came the sound of footsteps, slow, even, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush. Every eye turned upward. He descended like nightfall, a man in a midnight black suit. Bespoke, fitted to a broad frame, Pale, sharp features, dark hair slicked back. He moved with the lethal grace of something that hunts for a living, and there was no warmth in his face. None at all. Only authority. Absolute and cold. The whispers started again, but different now. These weren't whispers that mocked Beatrix. These were afraid. Is that Sorrentino? Dear God, don't look at him. Look away. Look away, Damien Sorrentino. The name moved through the crowd like cold water. He was a shipping magnate, on paper. One of the largest in the world, on paper. And everyone in that room knew that the paper was a curtain. And behind the curtain was something with teeth. He did not look at the billionaires. He did not look at the politicians. He did not look at Gerald Ashford. Sweating in his tuxedo, he looked at her. Only her. The crowd parted as he crossed the floor. They stepped back like he gave off heat. And maybe he did. And he walked straight through the gap they made until he was standing directly in front of Beatrix Halloran. He was tall. Easily 6'3". Broad through the shoulders. Up close he smelled of cedar and something sharper underneath. Something like gunsmoke, and Beatrix had to tilt her head back to look at him. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. She braced herself. For more cruelty. For a command. For whatever this terrifying man wanted to take from her. Because everyone in her life had always wanted to take something. Instead, he took off his jacket. He shrugged it from his shoulders in one smooth motion, and underneath it was a holster, a leather one, strapped over a crisp white shirt, with the dark shape of a weapon tucked against his side. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath. Damien ignored it. He draped the jacket over her shoulders. Gently, carefully. He drew the lapels together across her chest, covering the wine stain. Hiding it from 200 staring eyes, the lining was warm. It smelled of him. You are cold, he said. His voice was a low baritone, rough at the edges, and it sent something down her spine she did not have a name for. It was the first time she had ever heard him speak. She swallowed, clutched the edges of the jacket. Who are you? A man, he said quietly, who is deeply offended by the lack of manners in this room. And then he turned. The softness went out of him like a light switching off. He faced Coraline Ashford. He faced Spencer Cole. And when he spoke again, his voice was not quiet anymore. It filled the ballroom. It climbed the frescoed ceiling and came back down on every head in the room. Nobody leaves. Silence. Not until I have collected a debt. 1 ounce at a time. For every drop of disrespect shown to this woman tonight, Gerald shoved his way to the front, mopping his face with a handkerchief. Mr. Sorrentino. Damien. Please, this is a misunderstanding. They're just kids. They were only joking. Damien didn't look at him. He just snapped his fingers. 2 men in suits stepped forward. They took Gerald Ashford by the arms, and they forced him down. Down onto the cold marble floor, onto his knees in front of everyone. Coraline screamed and dropped her glass. It shattered. The sound was very loud in the dead silent room. Spencer Cole took a step backward. The smirk was gone from his handsome face. What was left was pale and damp and afraid. Joking, Damien repeated. He tasted the word like it was ash. He took slow steps toward Coraline. Tell me, Miss Ashford, do you find your father's debts amusing? Coraline's mouth opened. Nothing came out, because, according to certain ledgers, Damien went on. Your father owes my associates $42 million, a debt he secured using this very estate as collateral. Every chandelier, every painting, every marble tile under your knees. Coraline turned to look at her father. Gerald was weeping, silently. On the floor. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know ignorance, Damien said, is the disease of the privileged. He crouched down, slowly, until he was level with her, eye to eye, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was worse, so much worse, than if he had shouted, you mocked her size. You mocked the space she takes up in this world. You, a girl who has never earned a single dollar she has spent. You dared to lay your hands on a woman whose mind you could not match in 10 lifetimes. He stood. He turned to Spencer. Spencer was trying to back into the crowd. "Hold him," Damien said, quietly. 2 guards seized Spencer by the arms and dragged him forward. Damien reached out and gripped the collar of the young lawyer's expensive shirt. Twisted it. "Just enough. You like to comment on appetites," Damien said. "Low. Lethal." A whisper meant for Spencer, but carried just far enough for the front rows to hear. "Shall we discuss yours?" Spencer made a sound. A small, broken sound. "Shall we discuss the offshore accounts? The pension funds you have been quietly bleeding from your own firm's clients?" "Retirees, Mr. Cole. Old men and old women who trusted you with everything they had left." Spencer's face went the color of paper. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't. Or perhaps," Damien continued, "we discuss the gambling debts, the ones in Macau, the ones you owe to men who do not send polite reminders, please. They'll kill me." "I am still deciding," Damien said, releasing him with a small push of disgust, "whether to give them the honor or handle it myself." Spencer sank to the floor, and Damien walked back across the room, back to Beatrix. He stood beside her. He set one arm around her waist, around the soft and generous curve of it, and drew her gently against his side. Not to possess her, to shield her. There was a difference, and somehow, impossibly, she could feel the difference. He raised his voice to the room one final time. "This woman is Beatrix Halloran, 200 terrified faces, and from this moment forward, she is under my protection. Anyone who looks at her sideways, anyone who whispers her name with anything less than respect, will learn exactly why certain neighborhoods in this city do not see police." He looked down at Coraline. Weeping on the floor, "Get on your knees," he said, "both of you, and apologize." And across the ballroom, draped in a stranger's warm jacket, Beatrix Halloran watched the impossible happen. She watched the people who had tried to destroy her crumble onto the floor. She watched the untouchable become touchable. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Something complicated. Something she would untangle later when she was alone. She did not yet feel safe. But she felt seen, and for now, for tonight. That was enough to keep her standing. 6 months earlier, she remembered it now, standing there. Because the mind does that. It reaches for the past when the present stops making sense. It had been a warehouse, out by the water, the kind of place where the lights buzzed and the air smelled of dust and old canvas. And Beatrix had been hired by a company she had never heard of to appraise a collection of seized assets, Vesper Holdings. That was the name on the paperwork. She had not asked questions. You learn not to, in her line of work. The money was good. The art was interesting. And that was usually where her curiosity stopped. There had been a painting, an Artemisia Gentileschi, a real one or so they had claimed, and there had been men, big men, quiet men, men who stood too close and watched too carefully, and one of them in particular, a thick-necked man with dead eyes, had wanted something from her. "You'll authenticate it as a primary original," he had said, not a question. Beatrix had looked at the painting, then at him, then back at the painting. "It's a workshop copy," she had said. "The lapis lazuli application is wrong. Gentileschi ground her own pigments." This was done by an assistant. Decades later. "It's worth a fraction of what you think. You'll authenticate it," the man said again, "as a primary original." And here was the thing about Beatrix Halloran, the thing the man with the dead eyes did not understand. She had nothing left to be afraid of, a woman who has spent her whole life being told she is too much, too big, too loud, too visible, eventually arrives at a strange and quiet freedom. She had already been the thing they were all afraid of becoming. She had survived it. What was one more frightening man in a room full of dust? "No," she had said, "just that. I don't lie about brushwork. Not for you. Not for anyone. The painting is what it is, and I am what I am. And neither of us is going to change tonight. The man had stared at her for a long moment. And then she had packed up her loop and her notes and walked out. And she had thought that was the end of it. She had not known about the camera. She had not known that high above the warehouse floor, a security feed was running, and that weeks later, a man in a midnight black suit would watch that footage. Once, then again, then a dozen times more. She had not known that the thick-necked man with the dead eyes was an underboss, or that the man who watched the footage ran everything the underboss feared. She had told the truth to a killer over a painting. And Damien Sorrentino, a man who lived inside an architecture of lies, surrounded by fake smiles and fake loyalty and bodies carved by surgeons into fake perfection, had looked at the screen and seen the only real thing he had encountered in years. A woman who would not bend. A woman built like a Renaissance goddess who had stared down a murderer because the truth mattered more than her own safety. He had pulled the strings after that. Quietly, the way he did everything. An invitation to a gala, arranged through 3 layers of intermediaries so it never traced back to him, a promise of a private viewing, a reason for her to be in that ballroom tonight, where he intended, finally, to approach her properly. He had not intended for them to humiliate her first. That part had not been in his plan, and it was going to cost the Ashfords more than they could possibly imagine. They crawled to her across the spilled wine, Coraline first, then Spencer. The same dark Pinot Noir now staining their own designer clothes. A small poetic justice she noticed and did not enjoy as much as she had expected to. Coraline looked up, tears streaming. "I'm sorry," she choked. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Please, apologize for calling her fat," Damien said. His hand rested at the small of Beatrix's back. "Steady. Apologize for pretending her size makes her worth less." "Apologize for being empty. I'm sorry," Coraline sobbed. "I'm sorry for what I said about your body." You're beautiful. I was jealous. I'm sorry." Spencer rushed to add his own pleas. Pathetic, desperate. A man who had been cruel only because he had thought cruelty was safe. And Beatrix looked down at them. For 32 years, she had carried the small daily weight of being a large woman in a thin woman's world. She had weathered all of it, the diet culture, the backhanded compliments, the 1,000 small exclusions that taught a large woman exactly where the world thought she belonged. But standing here, in the warmth of a stranger's jacket, in a silence she had not asked for but could not deny, the weight of all those years simply lifted. She did not pity them, but she did not want to become them either. Revenge does not fill the hole that cruelty digs, it only makes the hole deeper. "Your apologies mean nothing to me," she said. Her voice was steady. It carried, because you aren't sorry for what you did. You're only sorry there were finally consequences. Keep your hollow words. I have no use for them. She turned to Damien. "I want to leave," she said softly. "I don't want to breathe the same air as them anymore." He nodded. Once, he gave the signal to his men. The deadbolts unlocked. One, then next, and the great mahogany doors swung open, slowly, with the unhurried weight of a verdict. But before Beatrix took her first step, Damien raised one finger. "A moment," he said. He turned back to the ballroom, to the 200 guests still frozen in place, the hedge fund heirs, the surgeons' wives, the politicians whose donations would not save them from a 30-second phone call placed by the right man. "Some of you laughed tonight," he said. "Quiet. Even." I noticed. A small ripple of fear moved through the room. "I do not have time to address each of you personally, but I will say this. The favor of being noticed by me is rarely a favor. The favor of being remembered, less so. Tonight I have remembered many of you. I would advise you to remember yourselves, and to behave accordingly," he ordered. "Go home, quietly. Speak of this to no one, and here is what Beatrix did not know yet. Here is what no one in that ballroom knew. As the doors finally yielded and the wine dried, and the great Caravaggio waited in the West Wing for an examination that would never quite happen the way anyone planned. The wine had not been an accident. Someone in that room had wanted Beatrix Halloran gone before she ever laid eyes on that painting. Someone had whispered in Coraline's ear earlier in the evening. Someone had made sure the appraiser, the one person in the building with the eye to see the truth, would be too humiliated to ever ask for her private viewing. The cruelty had been real, but the cruelty had also been a cover, and the truth about a $60 million painting was sitting one floor up, in the dark, waiting for the only woman in the world who could see it. She just didn't know that yet. Damien raised his hand to signal his men, and somewhere in the locked and frightened ballroom, the person who had planned all of this watched Beatrix Halloran prepare to walk out the door, and smiled, because as far as they were concerned, everything was still going exactly to plan. It would be hours yet before any of them understood how wrong that was. The Maybach moved through the rain like a black ship through black water. Beatrix Halloran sat against the grime leather, her hands folded in her lap, his jacket still around her shoulders. Outside, the Long Island Expressway blurred past in streaks of red and white. Inside, the silence held a weight she did not yet know how to carry. Damien Sorrentino poured 2 measures of aged Macallan into crystal tumblers. He handed her one. Their fingers brushed. His skin was warm, almost hot, like a man with a fever. Except he wasn't fevered. He was just alive in a way most people weren't. Every part of him running hotter than the rest of the world. Drink, he said. It will help. She drank the whiskey burned. Not unpleasantly. It traced a line of warmth down through her chest, settling somewhere behind her ribs, and for the first time in 3 hours, she felt her shoulders come down from where they had been hiding by her ears. Why did you do that? She said. Not a question, a statement. The flat, exhausted tone of a woman who already half knew the answer and was simply waiting for someone to confirm it out loud. Damien set his glass down. He looked at her across the dim cabin, and his face was different now. Softer, or as close to soft as a face like that ever got. The warehouse, he said. 6 months ago, she nodded slowly. The Gentileschi, the workshop copy. Yes, there was a camera, he said. Above the loading bay. The footage came to me a week later. I watched it. I watched you tell my underboss the painting was fake. I watched a man who has killed 3 people I know about take a step closer to you. And I watched you not move, not flinch. You corrected his English while you did it. She let out a small, surprised laugh. I didn't correct his English. You did. He said the painting is primary. You said primary original. The two are not the same thing. Use the right words. Oh. She looked down into her whiskey. I forgot about that. I have not, the car turned. A private road now. Trees pressing in on either side. Beatrix watched the wipers move across the windshield. Once, twice, 3 times. She felt very tired. The way you only feel after the adrenaline finally lets go and your body remembers it has been afraid for hours. Who are you really? She said quietly. Mr. Sorrentino. Damien. Damien. Who are you really? He was quiet for a long moment. I run a shipping company, he said finally, and I run other things. The shipping company is real. The other things are also real. I will not pretend to you. Not tonight. Not ever. She nodded slowly. She had already known. You don't snap your fingers and put a billionaire on his knees in his own ballroom by running a shipping company. She had known the second the doors slammed shut, and probably before that, somewhere in the back of her mind, where her instincts kept all the things she did not want to say out loud. I have a question, she said. Ask. The invitation tonight. Did you arrange it? Yes, through 3 companies, so I wouldn't see your name. 4. Actually, 4. I did not want you to know I was watching. Not yet, until you had a chance to see me, and decide on your own whether I was worth knowing. She turned to look at him. "And what made you think tonight was the night?" "I didn't," he said. "I planned to introduce myself later in the evening. I planned to be charming. I planned to ask if you might consider dinner. The wine, the cruelty, none of that was supposed to happen." His jaw tightened. "Someone else planned that part." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He did not answer right away. The Maybach passed through a heavy wrought-iron gate, up a long, curving drive. The trees opened, and there it was, a fortress of glass and dark stone, low and broad. Set into the woods like it had grown there, lights glowed warmly behind tall windows. A house built to look beautiful and to repel a siege at the same time. She would think later that this was a good metaphor for the man who had built it. The foyer was as large as her entire apartment, marble floor, a staircase that curved like a question mark, antiques, real ones, a small Vermeer hanging where most men would have hung a mirror, and Beatrix had to make her professional face not react. Damien helped her out of her wet shoes. Quietly, without comment. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "No. Are you cold?" "A little." He brought her a wool blanket, cashmere, heavy. He set it around her shoulders, and she felt something soften inside her that she did not want to examine yet. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face changed. "I have to take this," he said. One moment, he stepped into an alcove, spoke low. She did not try to listen. But you can read a man's shoulders from across a room, if you have spent enough years reading paintings, and his shoulders went from relaxed to taut in the space of 2 sentences. He came back. "There has been an incident," he said. Tonight, at the gala, at my warehouse. The one where the Caravaggio is being kept." She set the whiskey down. "What kind of incident?" "Someone tried to enter." 2 hours ago, while we were still in the ballroom. They got in. They were in for less than 4 minutes. They did not take anything, according to my people. They did not damage anything. They simply walked in, walked to the painting, stood in front of it, and walked out. Beatrix went very still. "That's not nothing," she said. "No, 4 minutes is enough time to take a photograph. Yes, 4 minutes is enough time to make a switch. If you brought a duplicate, if you knew the dimensions exactly." His eyes met hers across the foyer. "Yes." She stood up. The blanket slid off her shoulder. She didn't notice. "Take me to it," she said. "Beatrix, you have been through enough tonight. Take me to it." Now, the vault was underground, 3 flights down, behind a steel door that read her face before it would let her pass. Beatrix had been in vaults before. Sotheby's had one she had worked in. The Met had one she had visited. Private collectors had a half-dozen of them between Manhattan and Greenwich. This one was different. This one felt like a tomb, climate-controlled, lined in dark steel. The light came from above, flat and white, the kind of light that doesn't lie to you about what it sees. In the center of the room, on an easel, draped under a soft cloth, stood the painting. Damien pulled the cloth back. And there it was, the Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence, or what was meant to be. Caravaggio had painted it in 1609 in Palermo, and it had hung in an oratory there until 1969, when thieves had cut it from its frame in the middle of the night and taken it. It had never been recovered. 40 years of speculation. 40 years of FBI lists and Vatican letters and rumored sightings, and now, according to Gerald Ashford, it had quietly surfaced through a reclusive collector in Switzerland, a $60 million painting. Sitting in a private vault in Alpine, New Jersey, Beatrix stepped closer. Her professional eye took over. The rest of her, the tired and bruised rest, stepped politely aside. "Bring me the light." Damien brought a UV flashlight and the loupe. There. On the desk, he brought the loupe. She did not thank him. She had stopped being a guest in his house the moment she had looked at the canvas. She was now an appraiser at work, and an appraiser at work did not have time for manners. She leaned in, close, her stomach pressed against the edge of the easel. She did not care. She had stopped caring about her body in rooms with paintings a long time ago. The chiaroscuro was right. The drama of the light. The way the figures emerged from the dark, the composition was right. St. Francis on the left, St. Lawrence on the right, the Virgin and Child centered. The angel above. All of it correct. The signature, where Caravaggio sometimes signed and sometimes did not, was absent. Also correct. He had not signed this one. Everything looked right. That was the first thing that bothered her, when something looks too right. When it looks like a textbook illustration of what it is supposed to be. That is when an appraiser begins to worry. She turned on the UV light. She passed it slowly across the lower left quadrant. St. Lawrence's yellow robes. Caravaggio had used lead tin yellow type 1. The same pigment Vermeer had loved. The same pigment that had vanished from European palettes by the early 18th century when craftsmen forgot how to make it. Under the UV, lead tin yellow type 1 fluoresces in a very specific way. Soft. Uneven. A faint orange shimmer in the depths of the pigment. This yellow did not fluoresce that way. It fluoresced uniformly. Too brightly, she tightened her jaw. She moved the light to the underdrawing. There are ways to see beneath the paint. With the right tools. Caravaggio famously did not use preliminary drawings. He incised his outlines directly into the wet primer with the wooden end of his brush handle. He worked fast. He worked from life. He had no patience for sketching. She saw graphite, faint, underneath. Lines of graphite where there should have been incisions. Graphite, which did not come into widespread artistic use until the late 18th century. She straightened. Damien. Yes, this is not a Caravaggio. He did not look surprised. You're sure? I will be sure in an hour. I am sure enough right now. Tell me what I am looking at, a forgery. A good one. 20th century. The pigments are wrong. The underdrawing is wrong. The aging cracks are too even. The craquelure was induced chemically, probably with a slow heat process. Someone wanted this to pass for a Caravaggio very badly, and someone paid a great deal of money to make sure it did. She paused. Something pulled at the back of her mind. A thread, a small one. She tugged at it and didn't quite catch it, and the not catching made her uneasy. What is it? He said. Nothing. Yet she turned to face him. Who authenticated this painting before you took it from Gerald? A man named Julian Vance. She closed her eyes. Julian Vance is a fraud, she said. He has been a fraud for 15 years. He takes bribes. He authenticates whatever he is paid to authenticate. The fact that Gerald used him should have told you the painting was suspect before I ever looked at it. Then why, Damien said quietly, did Gerald use it as collateral against $42 million in loans? She opened her eyes. Because he didn't know, or because he did know, Damien said, and he counted on no one looking too closely. She nodded slowly. Which is why someone wanted me out of that ballroom tonight. Yes, the wine, yes, that wasn't Coraline's idea. No, he said. It was not. She felt a small chill, not from the cold of the vault. From somewhere deeper she had been a target, not just a woman in a gown of emerald silk, not just an art appraiser, a target. The person standing between Gerald Ashford and a $42 million lie. She steadied herself against the edge of the desk. Damien. Yes, whoever planned that humiliation knew I was coming here tonight. They knew about your viewing. They knew I would see this painting. Yes, that means it isn't Gerald alone. No, Gerald didn't tell anyone outside his own house about your private viewing. He didn't. Which means she stopped. Her own thought catching up with her. Which means there is someone inside your house who told them. Damien was very still. He had already arrived at the same conclusion, she realized. He had arrived at it on the staircase, possibly, or in the car. Possibly even before that. He had simply been waiting for her to walk her own way there. The way a man does when he respects a woman's mind enough not to do the thinking for her. Yes, he said quietly. You have a traitor, It seems so. Inside your circle, inside the inner circle. How many people knew? 6. Including you, including me. She let out a slow breath. That is not a long list, she said. No. And one of the 5 Bogspools de Boss tried to make sure the only appraiser in the room could not look at this painting. Yes, and if I had been too humiliated to leave that ballroom with you tonight, if I had gone home in tears like they wanted, then by tomorrow morning the painting would be quietly switched, replaced with a real one, or a different fake, or simply moved, and no one would have ever known. Yes, she turned and looked at the painting again, the forgery on its easel for $60 million, this little piece of canvas. For an empire's worth of leverage, for a man's debts and another man's war, and a third man's secrets, all balanced on a yellow pigment that fluoresced the wrong color. Damien, yes, you have to call this off. Whatever you were planning to do tomorrow morning. Whatever announcement, whatever movement, you have to act like you believe this is a real Caravaggio. Why? Because if we act on what I just told you, the person inside your house will know I figured it out, and the people who hired them will know. And whatever play is coming next, we will not see it until it is on top of us. He looked at her a long moment. You think clearly, he said. Under pressure, I am an appraiser. Pressure is half the job. I will keep this quiet. Good, and the traitor. She lifted her chin. Let them think they are winning. The phone call came at 3 in the morning. Beatrix was awake. She had not been able to sleep, despite the bed, despite the cashmere sheets, despite the small private silence of the wing of the house Damien had given her. Her mind kept circling 6 people. One of them, she had met 3 of them tonight, briefly, on the way upstairs. Dorsey, Damien's right hand, broad-shouldered, quiet, grey suit, the kind of man who watched a room without seeming to. He had inclined his head to her as Damien introduced her, and he had not smiled. But his eyes had been careful, and careful eyes can mean many different things. She had not decided yet what they meant. The other 2 she had not met. Damien had named them. A woman named Mercer, who handled the legal end. A man named Holloway, who handled the legitimate shipping side. 6 people. 5 candidates. Then the phone rang somewhere in the house. She heard Damien's voice, low, sharp. The voice of a man receiving bad news at a bad hour. A minute later he was at her door. Get dressed, he said. What happened? The Russos. She sat up. The rival family. Gerald's friends. Yes. What did they do? Nothing yet. But they are about to. Gerald has gone to them. He has offered them the painting in exchange for a strike on my port operations tonight. 3 locations along the Hudson. By dawn, how do you know this? A source inside their organization called me 20 minutes ago. He owes me a favor from years ago, and he is paying it back tonight. She was already pulling on the clothes one of the staff had laid out for her. Soft, dark, practical. Damien, yes. If they hit your ports, what happens? Tens of millions in damages, possibly hundreds, possibly casualties. My men are at those ports tonight. How long do we have? 2 hours. Maybe 3. Her mind raced, and the traitor, I do not know if the traitor is connected to this. I do not know if Gerald's move is independent or coordinated. Assume coordinated. Yes, because if your traitor told Gerald you have the painting in this house, then Gerald told the Russos, and the Russos know we have it, and they will not just attack the ports. They will attack here too, he paused. Yes, Damien. What? You are not safe in your own house tonight. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in his face that was not certainty. It was a small thing, a flicker, the kind of thing only an appraiser would notice. An appraiser who had spent her life learning to see what was hidden under the surface. But it was there, the first crack. He moved his men. She watched it happen. 2 black SUVs pulled out of the garage and rolled silently down the drive. Half the security detail went with them. Damien was sending bodies to the ports, to hold what could be held, to save what could be saved. It thinned the house. Of course it thinned the house. That was the point. That was why the attack had been timed for tonight. That was why Gerald had moved when he had moved. The Russos did not just want the ports. The Russos wanted Damien himself, and wanted him in his own home with too few men around him. Beatrix watched the SUVs disappear down the drive, and she felt cold all the way down. She found Damien in his study, pulling on a tactical vest under a black jacket. The shoulder holster was already in place. He was checking the weapon. "You're going to the port," she said. "I am. You shouldn't. Beatrix, you shouldn't, Damien. They want you out of this house. If you leave this house, you are doing exactly what they want. My men are at those ports. Your men have their orders. Your men have Dorsey." She stopped. She stopped because she had said the name, and she had not meant to say the name. And she watched his face very carefully when she said it. Damien did not react, which is not the same as not noticing. "Dorsey is going to the south port," he said. "Holloway to the north. Mercer is coordinating from the city. I am going to the central facility. It is the largest. It is the one they will hit hardest, and the house will be locked, sealed, 4 men inside. You will be safe with 4 men." "Who report to whom?" He paused to Dorsey. She nodded. She did not say what she was thinking. She did not have to. She watched the same thought move slowly across his face. She watched him register it. She watched him decide what to do about it. "Stay in the vault," he said quietly, "until I return. Take the keys. Lock the inside. Do not open the door for anyone, not even me. Then how will I know when you come back?" "You won't," he said. "I will not come for you. When this is over, I will send a man whose face you have not yet seen. He will give you a phrase. The yellow is wrong. If he says that phrase, you may come out. If he does not, you may not. The yellow is wrong. The yellow is wrong. That is the safe word." "Yes," she nodded. She wanted, briefly, to ask him not to go. The wanting surprised her. She had known this man for less than 12 hours. She had no business wanting anything from him. And yet she stood in his study at 3:30 in the morning and felt the want move through her like weather. She did not ask. She said instead, "Be careful." He took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her hand directly. His fingers were warm, steady. He looked down at her for a long moment. "Mia Regina," he said quietly, and then he was gone. She did not stay in the vault. She tried. For about 15 minutes she sat at the desk in the vault and stared at the forgery on its easel. And she could not sit still, because something was wrong. Something larger than the forgery, larger than the ambush, larger than the Russos and the ports, and the traitor she could feel breathing somewhere in the house above her. She could not name it yet. She went back up. She moved through the dark halls of Damien's fortress quietly. The 4 guards he had left were posted near the main entrances. She passed one of them on the 2nd floor. He nodded to her. He did not stop her. She nodded back and kept walking, and felt his eyes on her back the entire way down the corridor. She found Damien's study again. It was unlocked. The light from a single desk lamp threw a soft cone across his desk. A laptop. Closed. A leather notebook. A coffee cup gone cold. She did not open the laptop. She did not open the notebook. She looked at the wall instead. Damien had a small painting hanging there. A Goya, she thought. A private collection piece. She had not been in this room long enough earlier to look at it properly. Now she did. It was beautiful. Late period. The dark, broken brushwork of a man who had stopped caring whether anyone could see his face in the mirror. Something about it caught her eye. She stepped closer, lifted the UV flashlight she had pocketed without realizing, clicked it on. She passed the light slowly across the canvas and froze. This Goya was not a Goya either. It was an excellent forgery, possibly the same hand that had painted the Caravaggio. The brushwork was very good, but the underpaint was off, and the craquelure had the same induced too even pattern. And there it was again. That faint signature of chemistry where decades of aging should have been. She lowered the flashlight. Her hand was shaking. She turned slowly in the room. She looked at the other paintings on the walls. There were 3. A small one near the door, a larger one above the credenza, a landscape over the fireplace. She crossed to each in turn. UV light up. Eyes close. All 3 were fakes. And then she understood. It came to her all at once, like a piece of glass dropping into place. Damien Sorrentino had been collecting masterpieces for years. Quietly, privately, through brokers and dealers and the occasional grey market sale. His collection was, on paper, worth a fortune. If his collection was full of forgeries, then someone had been selling forgeries to him for years. Then someone, slowly, patiently, over time, had been hollowing out his actual wealth from the inside. Then the Caravaggio in the vault was not an aberration. It was the latest move in a very long game, and there was only one person who could pull off a game like that. A person Damien trusted absolutely. A person inside the inner circle. A person who had been there from the beginning. She lowered herself slowly into Damien's chair. Her chest hurt. Not pain, just pressure. The pressure of a truth too large for the room, whoever this was. They had not waited until tonight to betray him. They had been betraying him for years. The Caravaggio play tonight was just the endgame, the grand finale. The piece that would either bring the whole structure down or hand it over to the Russos. Or both. And it explained something else. It explained why someone had been so determined to get her out of that ballroom tonight. She was not a threat because of one painting. She was a threat because she was the kind of woman who, if she stayed in Damien Sorrentino's life long enough, would eventually look at every painting in his house. And, see, she set the flashlight down very carefully on the desk. She did not know yet who the traitor was. She had 2 strong guesses, both ugly, because Damien had ridden out into the dark to defend his ports, and every man with him was either loyal, or one of them was not, and if she did not warn him before sunrise, then everything she had figured out in this dim study would not matter at all. Because Damien Sorrentino would not be alive at dawn to hear it, the phone he had given her, the small black one he had pressed into her palm before he left, was in the pocket of her jeans. She took it out. She held it in her hand for a long moment. If she called him, and the line was monitored, the traitor would know she knew. If she did not call him, the traitor would still win. She thought about it for 3 full seconds. Then she made her choice. She got up. She walked, out of the study, down the long corridor, past the second-floor guard, who looked up as she passed, his hand resting just inside his jacket. "Where are you going, ma'am?" he said. "Back to the vault," she said. At this hour, he watched her go. She walked the rest of the way without looking back. She walked down the stairs and across the foyer and through the door that led to the vault stairs. She walked down. She unlocked the steel door. She stepped inside. She closed it behind her. She locked it from the inside. And only then, in the deep silence of 3 floors underground, did she lift the small black phone and dial the only number it had been programmed to call. It rang once, twice. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Beatrix, his voice was tight. Background noise, wind, movement. He was already at the port. "Damien, listen to me. Do not say anything. Just listen. Go. The forgery in the vault is not the only one. Your study, your Goya, your hallway pieces, they are all fakes. Someone has been replacing your collection for years. Years, Damien. This is not a play that started tonight. This is a play that has been running the whole time you have known the person who is running it." Silence. Just the wind on his end. "Damien, I hear you. It is one of the 6. It has to be. No one else has been close enough for long enough." A long pause. Then his voice came back. Quiet, steady, but changed. "Dorsey was the one who introduced me to my last 3 dealers, Damien, and he is at the South Port right now." With 12 of my men, Damien, do not. I know. I will not move yet. I will not show my hand. But I will not turn my back to him either. Be careful. Stay in the vault until you hear the phrase. From a face you do not know, I will. Good. The line went dead. She lowered the phone slowly. She sat down on the cold floor of the vault, her back against the wall, the forgery on its easel, watching her from across the room with the painted, indifferent eyes of saints who had never existed. She closed her own eyes and realized, with a small, sharp shock, that she was no longer afraid. She was something else. She was ready. She had spent 32 years being told she was too much. And tonight, somewhere between the ballroom and the vault, she had finally understood the truth that all those small, cruel people had been so desperate to hide from her. She had never been too much. She had only ever been exactly the right size, for exactly this kind of room, for exactly this kind of war. Far above her, somewhere out in the rain, the first shots of the night were about to fire, and the woman they had tried to laugh out of a ballroom only hours ago was now the only person in the world who could see the whole board. She opened her eyes. She picked up the flashlight. She got back to work. The vault was silent in the way only stone 3 floors underground can be silent. Beatrix Halloran sat with her back against the wall and listened to her own heart. It was not racing. That surprised her. She had expected it to race. She had expected the kind of panic that lives in a woman's chest in the small hours of the morning, when the world has narrowed to a single locked room and a single locked door and a single small black phone going dark in her palm. Instead, her heart was steady, the way it had been 6 months ago, in that warehouse, in front of a killer, in front of a painting that was not what it claimed to be. She had been built for this. She had simply not known it yet. She stood. She walked across the vault, to the easel, to the forgery that had started everything. She looked at it now with fresh eyes, not as evidence, not as proof of Gerald Ashford's fraud, as a clue, as the most recent move in a game someone had been playing inside Damien Sorrentino's life for years. Whoever the forger was, they were excellent. The brushwork on St. Lawrence's robes, the composition, the faked craquelure. This was not the work of some weekend faker working out of a Brooklyn loft. This was a master, a person who understood Caravaggio's hand the way a violinist understands Paganini's bow. And here is the thing about masters. There are not many of them in the entire world, in the entire field. The number of living forgers good enough to fool Julian Vance, fool the Russos and almost fool her, could be counted on one hand, maybe 2. She knew most of them by reputation. Some by name. She stared at the painting. She started cataloguing it, out loud, to herself, the way she had always done. The way her mother had taught her when she was 9 years old, and the 2 of them had stood in front of a small canvas in a museum in Boston. And her mother had said, "Tell me what you see, Bea. Tell me." Out loud, not what they tell you to see, what you see. She did it now. The light source is upper left. Strong, hard-edged, Caravaggio's signature lighting. Whoever painted this knew his work intimately, not as a copyist, as a student. The pigment on St. Lawrence is wrong. The yellow is too uniform, but the underpaint shows correct mixing for the era. Whoever did this knew exactly how Caravaggio mixed paint. They just used modern pigments to do it. The craquelure is induced. The pattern is too regular, but it has been induced very carefully. The forger knew how Italian 17th century paint actually aged in Sicilian humidity. They mimicked it almost perfectly. The signature absence is correct. Caravaggio did not sign this composition. A bad forger would have signed it anyway. A good one would not. This forger is not just good. This forger is disciplined. She paused, disciplined. Something pulled at her, a second time tonight. The same small thread. She closed her eyes. A discipline like that does not come out of nowhere. A forger like that does not appear from the dark. A forger like that has a history. has a teacher, has an apprenticeship somewhere. Somewhere that taught them the difference between lead tin yellow type 1 and type 2. The difference between an incised outline and a graphite one. The difference between a saint's robe in Palermo and a saint's robe in Naples. A teacher, Beatrix sat down very slowly on the cold floor. Her mother had been a forger, not professionally, not for money. Her mother had been a failed painter, a brilliant one, a woman whose own work had never quite found a buyer, and who had paid the rent in their small apartment in Boston by quietly making copies. Excellent copies, honest copies, mostly. Reproductions for collectors who could not afford originals. Study pieces for art students, the occasional copy for a museum gift shop. But sometimes, when the rent was very late and the heat was about to go off, her mother had made copies that were not so honest. Copies that went out into the world without her name on them. Copies that, as far as Beatrix had ever known, had vanished into the upper end of the grey market and never been heard from again. Her mother had died when Beatrix was 21. Cancer. Fast, cruel. The kind of death that takes a woman before her daughter has finished asking her all the questions she should have asked. Beatrix had inherited her mother's tools, her brushes, her books, her notebooks. She had kept them in a box in her closet. For 11 years, she had not looked at them in a very long time. She stood up, her mouth was dry. She walked back to the easel, slowly. She lifted the UV flashlight again. She passed it across the lower right corner of the canvas. The corner where Caravaggio sometimes left small marks of his process. The corner that good forgers always finish last there. Under the paint, where most eyes would never look, a small mark. Not a signature, not in any obvious sense, a tiny curl of pigment. Almost invisible, a private tick, a way of knowing the work was theirs without ever admitting it, a small curl. Like a comma, like a wave. Beatrix's mother had used that mark on every honest copy she had ever made, on every reproduction, a little curl in the lower right corner, hidden under the final glaze, a private joke between her and the painting. Beatrix had not seen that mark in 11 years. She saw it now. She had to sit down again. Her mother had not painted this. Her mother had been dead for 11 years. But someone had painted it who knew her mother's mark. Someone who had been close to her. Someone who had studied with her. Someone who had inherited her techniques. Someone who knew how she signed. Someone Beatrix's mother had taught. Beatrix sat on the floor of a vault under a Mafia boss's house in New Jersey at 3:45 in the morning and tried to remember every student her mother had ever taken in. The list was small. Her mother had been a private woman. She had not run a studio, but there had been a few over the years. A few people her mother had mentored. A few young painters who had come and gone through their apartment in Boston for a few months at a time. Drinking her mother's coffee and learning her mother's technique, Beatrix had been a child for most of them. She had not paid attention to their names, except one. She remembered one, because that one had been kind to her, had brought her caramels from a deli on Newbury Street, had sat with her at the kitchen table and let her watch him sketch the salt cellar in graphite. A small still life on the back of a napkin, while her mother corrected paintings in the next room, a young man, in his early 20s then, quiet, tall, pale. With dark hair he wore slightly long, and a way of moving that suggested he had been raised somewhere very far from Boston. His name had been Lazzaro Bellini. He had stayed with them, on and off, for nearly 2 years, and then he had disappeared, the way young men do. Beatrix's mother had said only that he had gone home, to family business, to something that needed him. She had said it carefully, the way she'd said things she did not want a child to ask follow-up questions about. Beatrix had forgotten him. Until now, above ground, the rain had stopped. The first thin grey of false dawn had begun to push at the edges of the sky. Damien Sorrentino stood at the central facility of his port operation, a long concrete pier, black water on either side, 40 containers stacked under the floodlights. His men in dark jackets along the perimeter, weapons low but ready. He had not been ambushed. That was the first wrong thing. He had expected to be hit hard the moment he arrived. He had braced for it. He had walked into the floodlit yard, knowing he was making himself a target, knowing it was the only way to draw the Russo attack out where his men could see it, and nothing had come. 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Nothing. He had stood by the water and looked out at the grey dawn and thought. A man does not run a syndicate for 20 years without learning the difference between a quiet that is empty and a quiet that is full. This was a quiet that was full. He pulled the second phone from his jacket, the encrypted one, the one only his most senior people had the number to. He did not call Dorsey. He called Holloway. Holloway, yes, status at the North Port, quiet, no movement, no sign of approach. We are watching the water. How quiet. Nothing. Not a fishing boat. Not a kid on a bicycle. Nothing. And the South. I have not heard from Dorsey since I arrived here. He has not radioed in. I assumed he was on tactical silence. Damien was silent for a moment. Holloway, yes, you have known me how long? 18 years. Have I ever asked Dorsey to keep tactical silence on a deployment like this? No. Have I ever told you to? No. So why is he silent? A pause. I think we do know. Damien said quietly. I think we both know. He hung up. He stood by the water and felt very cold and very calm. The Russo attack was not coming to these ports. The attack on these ports had been the bait. The thing that would draw Damien out of his house and split his security and place him exactly where he was right now, alone in a floodlit yard with a fraction of his men, watching black water at dawn, and his right hand, his Dorsey. His 20-year man was somewhere else tonight, was probably already on his way back to the house. Where Beatrix was, Damien moved fast then, faster than a man his size should have been able to. He was in the SUV in seconds, and the SUV was moving in seconds more, and he was on the phone again before they were out of the gate. Holloway, boss, bring everyone you have. Now, the house. Not the ports, the house. Tell Mercer too, yes, boss. And Holloway, yes. If Dorsey arrives before I do, a long pause, yes, boss. You know what to do. The line went dead. In the vault, Beatrix's small black phone lit up. She picked it up, Damien. Beatrix, listen, I am coming back. I will be there in 40 minutes, maybe less. Stay in the vault. Do not open the door for anyone until you hear the phrase, from a face I do not know. Yes, there will be a man named Holloway. He may arrive before me. He is one of my own. He may bring others. He will not have the phrase, so you will not open the door for him either, only for the face you do not know. Only for the phrase, I understand. And Beatrix, yes, I am sorry. That stopped her for what? For bringing you into this. For thinking I could keep you safe while I tore down the people who had hurt you. For not seeing what was already happening inside my own walls. For all of it, she closed her eyes. Damien, yes, I am not in this because you brought me. I am in this because I walked in, on my own feet, 6 months ago, in a warehouse, over a gentileschi. You did not pull me into anything. I was already here. A small sound on the line, almost a laugh. Almost, Mia Regina, come home, I am coming. The line went dead a second time. She set the phone down and then she heard it footsteps. Above her, on the stairs that led down to the vault. She froze. Holloway was 40 minutes out. Damien was 40 minutes out. The man with the phrase was at least that long. These footsteps were too soon. She stood up, quietly. She moved to the side of the vault door. She pressed her back against the steel. She listened. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A pause, then a voice. Through the heavy door. Slightly muffled but clear enough. Beatrix. Open the door. It's me, Dorsey. Her stomach dropped. She did not answer, Beatrix. I know you're in there. Damien sent me to bring you up. There has been a development. He needs you outside. She did not answer. A long silence, then the voice changed. Just a little. A small note underneath the calm. The note of a man whose first move has not worked, Beatrix. Open the door. She did not move, Beatrix. The phrase is. The yellow is wrong. She closed her eyes. How had he known the phrase? How? How had he known? There was only one way. He had been close enough to the line when Damien and she had set it. Or he had access to the phone records. Or someone in the security setup had reported it back to him. Any of those answers meant the same thing. He was the traitor, and he had just confirmed it himself. Beatrix stood with her back against cold steel and tried to keep her breathing quiet. The voice spoke again, lower now. Almost reasonable. Beatrix, I am not your enemy. I want you to understand that. Damien has made some very poor decisions. He has gotten in too deep. People are going to get hurt tonight. I am trying to make sure you are not one of them. Please. Open the door. She did not answer, Beatrix. I know about your mother. That one made her flinch. But she did not answer, Lazaro told me, about the apartment in Boston, about the salt cellar, about the lessons. He has a great deal of affection for you, still. He does not want you hurt either. So Lazaro Bellini was the forger. She had been right. She filed it away. Used the cold of the vault door to steady her hands, Beatrix. I am going to tell you what is going to happen. I am going to step away from this door for 60 seconds while I am away. I want you to think about your options. You have very few. The phone you have was rerouted through my network the moment Damien gave it to you. Any further calls you make will come to me. You cannot reach him. You cannot reach anyone. You are alone down there, in a steel room, with a forged painting, and no way out. A pause. In 60 seconds I will return. When I return, you will open the door. We will walk upstairs together. You will not be hurt. You will, in fact, walk out of this house tonight a wealthy woman. If you can find the wisdom to listen to a reasonable offer. Footsteps receding. Beatrix stood very still and tried to think. Her phone was compromised. Even if it was not, Damien was 40 minutes away. Dorsey was outside her door now. She had perhaps 2 minutes before he came back. She had no weapon. She had no way out of this room except through the door he was standing behind. What she had was a forgery on an easel, a UV flashlight, a loop, a leather notebook on the desk where Damien's appraiser kept his notes. A small set of tools and a brain that had spent 32 years learning to see things other people missed, she thought. What did Dorsey want? He had come down here. He had asked her to open the door. He had not blown the door. He had not threatened violence. He had been calm. He had offered her money. He wanted something from her that he did not yet have. What? She looked around the vault, the Caravaggio forgery on its easel. Of course. Dorsey did not want to kill her. Dorsey wanted the forgery. He had moved the original out of this vault tonight, in those 4 quiet minutes when an intruder had entered and exited and changed nothing. And now he needed to come back for the forgery, because the forgery was the only piece of evidence in the entire scheme. The forgery was the proof that Damien's collection had been being hollowed out for years. As long as the forgery existed in the vault, anyone who looked at it could see what she had seen. If he could get the forgery out of this room before dawn, the only physical evidence of his entire decade-long scheme would be gone. He needed her to open the door so he could take the painting. He probably also wanted her quiet about what she had seen. But the painting was the prize. She looked at the easel, and she had an idea. It was a small idea, a bad idea. The kind of idea a woman has at 4 in the morning when she has been awake too long and has nothing left to lose. But it was the only idea she had. She crossed to the desk. Quickly, quietly, she opened the appraiser's drawer. Inside were tools, knives, solvents, the small, terrible objects of a profession that lives at the intersection of beauty and chemistry, she picked up a bottle. Solvent, strong. The kind used to lift paint when an old varnish needed to come off. She crossed back to the easel. She lifted the canvas off its support. She laid it on the floor. She unscrewed the cap of the solvent. She looked down at it, at St. Lawrence's wrong yellow robes, at St. Francis's careful old hands, at the work of a man who had once sat at her mother's kitchen table and let a small girl watch him sketch a salt cellar. She did not feel anger. She did not even feel grief. She felt something quieter. The thing you feel when you understand, finally, that the world is exactly as it is, and not as you wished it to be. She poured the solvent across the canvas slowly, methodically, the way you pour wine into a glass when you have all night. The paint began to lift, soft, discolored. The chiaroscuro began to muddy. The yellow began to weep. She destroyed it. She destroyed $60 million of forged Caravaggio with a 4-ounce bottle of paint stripper at 4 in the morning. And her hands did not shake. When she was done, she set the bottle down. She looked at the ruined canvas on the floor. The figures had blurred. The composition was gone. What was left was a smeared, ugly thing, recognizable only as an oil painting that had been very badly damaged, useless. To Dorsey, to Gerald, to the Russos, to anyone. She picked up the small black phone. She knew the line was compromised. She did not care anymore. She sent one text to Damien. I destroyed the painting. Dorsey is at the vault door. He wants it. Tell Holloway. She set the phone down. She walked back to the door. She pressed her back against the steel. She waited. The footsteps returned. Beatrix, your 60 seconds are up. Open the door. She did not answer. Beatrix, please. She closed her eyes. I destroyed it. A long silence on the other side. What? I destroyed it, Dorsey. The painting. The Caravaggio. I poured solvent on it. It is ruined. There is nothing left for you to take. A longer silence. Then a sound she had never heard before. A small, sharp sound. The sound of a man who has spent 10 years building something. Watching the last brick fall. You stupid woman. Maybe. You stupid, stupid woman. Do you know what you have done? I have an idea. The voice changed. Cold now. Not calm cold. Open the door. No, open the door, or I will open it for you. You will need a great deal of explosive to open this door, Dorsey. Damien had it built, and by the time you get it open, Holloway will be here. And so will Damien. And you will be standing in a vault next to a ruined painting, with no way to explain why you are there. Silence, a long one then. Beatrix, you have just signed your own death warrant, maybe. You will not leave this house alive. That part is up to other people now. Footsteps. Receding. Fast, he was running. She slid down the cold steel of the door and sat on the floor. Her legs shook. They had not shaken until now. Now they shook. She listened to the silence above her. She waited. Damien came through the front of the house at 5:14 in the morning. He came in with Holloway and 12 men. And they did not knock. Dorsey did not make it to his car. There was a short exchange in the foyer. Beatrix heard nothing of it from the vault. She would later be told that Dorsey had drawn his weapon, that he had not been faster than Holloway, that he had bled out on the marble floor before anyone could have called an ambulance, even if anyone had intended to. She would be told only the parts she could bear to know. Beatrix sat on the floor of the vault and waited, and at 5:22 there was a knock at the door, and a voice she did not know spoke through the steel. Miss Halloran. My name is Calderone. I work for Mr. Sorrentino. The yellow is wrong. She stood up. She unlocked the door. She opened it. The man on the other side was about 40, short, square, a face she had never seen before in her life. He nodded to her once, politely. Mr. Sorrentino is upstairs, he said. He asked me to escort you to him. She nodded. She walked. She did not look at the foyer when she crossed it. Holloway had laid a sheet over a long shape on the marble, and the marble was darker around it. And Beatrix knew without looking what it was, and she did not look. She would think about it later. She would think about all of it later. Damien was in the small drawing room off the foyer. He was sitting in a chair. There was blood on his jacket. Not his. He stood when she came in. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke. He crossed to her. He did not touch her at first. He simply stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him again. That strange running hot of his body, alive and certain in a way most people were not. He raised one hand. He laid it, gently, against her cheek. "Beatrix, I'm all right. You destroyed the painting. I did. That was very expensive. It was a fake." Even so, he laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. It was a small laugh. Quiet, almost startled. The laugh of a man who has not laughed in a long time, and has forgotten that he is capable of the sound. In the weeks that followed, the loose pieces of that long night settled into place. Coraline Ashford came to key Beatrix's apartment 2 weeks later. Beatrix had moved into a small place of her own by then. Coraline looked older, smaller, like someone had let a little of the air out of her. She did not come to apologize. She came because she had gone looking through her father's office. After the gala, after the Sorrentino business, she had found papers, insurance documents, forgeries, names, including the name Bellini. She did not understand most of what she had found, but she knew, the way daughters always know, what kind of man her father had become. And she had come to Beatrix, because Beatrix had been the only person in that ballroom who did not deserve what happened to her. And because Beatrix had been the only person who had looked at her afterward as if she were still a human being, even when she told her that her apology meant nothing. Beatrix listened to all of it. She made the young woman tea. She took the papers. 3 weeks later, Gerald Ashford was arrested by federal agents on charges of multinational bank fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. The papers had been turned over through 3 layers of intermediaries to the SEC and the FBI. The forensic accountants would handle the rest. The Russos quietly moved on. There was no painting to fight over. There was no reason to start a war. They were practical men, in their way. Lazzaro Bellini disappeared somewhere in Europe. Beatrix did not pursue him. She found when she thought of him at all that she did not want to. He had been a young man at her mother's kitchen table once. He had brought her caramels. Whatever he had become, she did not want the satisfaction of breaking him personally. There was a kind of grief that did not want a closing chapter. Coraline left the country quietly, with the help of a lawyer Damien recommended. She would be safe. On a Tuesday in late October. Beatrix met Damien for dinner at a small restaurant on the East River. He had asked. She had said yes. The restaurant had a window. The window looked out at the water. The water held the late light of an autumn afternoon, and the bridge in the distance was lit in long, slow lines of orange. They ordered. They ate. They did not talk about the painting. They did not talk about the vault. They did not talk about Dorsey or Holloway or the foyer. They talked about her work, about a small Vermeer she suspected had been misattributed for 40 years, about a Goya she wanted to examine, properly this time, with the right tools, about a museum in Madrid that had written to her, asking if she would consider a sabbatical year. He listened. He listened like a man who had been listening to her for 6 months already, through a security feed in a warehouse, through a planned introduction at a gala that had gone wrong in every possible way, through a phone call at 4 a.m. in a vault 3 floors underground. He listened like a man who had never seen her body and decided what it meant before letting her speak, who had instead, from the very first moment, listened to her mind, and then her voice, and then her hands, and only afterward let himself notice the shape of her. It was, she thought, a very strange kind of love story. It was, she thought, the only kind worth telling. When the bill came, she paid half. He let her. He let her because he had learned, in his way, what to give a woman who has spent her life being told she is too much. You give her room, and then you stand next to her in it, and you let her decide what to do with all of it. She would think, sometimes, about the ballroom, about the wine on the silk, about the laughter, about the small, thin woman with the elbow, and the small, thin man beside her, and the 200 faces turning. She would think about the doors slamming shut. She would think about the man on the staircase. But more often, when she thought of that night, she thought of one moment, a small one, the one she had almost missed at the time and had only later understood was the moment that mattered. It was the moment Damien had taken off his jacket, not the moment he had threatened the room, not the moment he had put Gerald on his knees. Those moments had been spectacle. They had served their purpose, and she would not pretend she had not been grateful for the spectacle. But they had not been the real thing. The real thing was the jacket. A man in a midnight black suit had walked across a ballroom of 200 people, and the first thing he had done was take off his own jacket and put it over her shoulders. To cover a stain, to warm her, to say, without saying, she was not alone in the room. That was always the moment. The world is full of men who will lock the doors and frighten everyone in the room on a woman's behalf. There are not many of them, but there are some. The world is much emptier of men who will simply take off their own jacket first. She had found one, and he, in his own complicated way, had found her too. And they had built, slowly, carefully, in the months and years that followed, the kind of life two people build when they have decided that the only thing worth having is the truth. About paintings, about each other, about the size of the space a person is allowed to take up in this world, which is, Beatrix Halloran came at last to understand, exactly as much as they need, no more, no less, and not 1 inch apologized for. Winter came hard that year, the kind of winter that arrives early and forgets to leave, the kind that buries Long Island in a low grey sky for weeks at a time. That makes the windows of small apartments rattle. That makes a woman pull a cashmere blanket over her knees and decide, some mornings, that she is not going anywhere at all. Beatrix Halloran spent the first 3 weeks of November learning a new shape of her own life. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old pre-war building on East 86th, high ceilings, plaster walls, tall windows that faced south and caught what little light the season would give. She had chosen it herself. She had paid the deposit herself. And when Damien Sorrentino had quietly doubled the security in the building without telling her about it, she had quietly pretended not to notice. That was the shape of it now. 2 people, each respecting the other's room, each pretending very gently not to notice the small protective things the other was doing. It was new. It was new, and it was strange, and it was, in a way she could not have named 6 months earlier, the kindest thing that had ever happened to her. The work came back first. She had worried about that. In those quiet first weeks after the long night at the house in Alpine, she had worried that the field would close to her. That word travels in the art world. That her name would be tied to a Caravaggio that had not been a Caravaggio, to a vault that had not been just a vault, to a man whose name she did not say in professional company. She had been wrong about that. The Madrid Museum wrote first, a formal letter on heavy paper. Would she consider a sabbatical? 6 months. To examine a small collection of Spanish Baroque pieces that had not been looked at properly in 40 years. She wrote back. Yes, with conditions. She had her own life to attend to. She would come for 2 months, not 6. She would do the work, write the report, and return. The museum agreed by return mail. The Sotheby's call came next, not the usual contact, someone higher up. A woman who had heard about a Vermeer Beatrix had mentioned in passing to someone who had mentioned it to someone else. The painting had been hanging in a Connecticut estate for 40 years as a minor Dutch interior. The new owners had begun to suspect. Would Miss Halloran come up? She went. She spent 3 days in the Connecticut house. The owners were old, a husband and wife in their 70s. The kind of people who poured her coffee themselves and apologized for the size of the cookies. She liked them immediately. The painting was a Vermeer, a minor one, not one of the great compositions, a small study, possibly a study for a larger work that no longer existed. But the brushwork was his, the light was his, the pigments tested clean, the provenance, when she traced it back, ran through a Belgian collector who had bought it in 1924 at an estate sale for almost nothing. She told the old couple. The husband sat down very slowly on the arm of a sofa. The wife cried quietly into a handkerchief she pulled from a pocket of her cardigan. Beatrix did not tell them what the painting was worth. She told them what it was. The worth, she said gently, was for auction houses to argue about later. Tonight was just for knowing. She drove back to the city in the dark. She thought, on the drive, about her mother. She thought about her mother a lot that year. More than she had in a decade. The vault had cracked something open. The name Bellini, said through a heavy steel door at 3:45 in the morning, had cracked something open, and in the quiet weeks afterward, the cracks had widened, and the things that had been kept on the other side of them for 11 years had come back into her life. She took the box down from the closet. She had not opened it in 11 years. The tape on the lid was brown and brittle. The cardboard smelled of dust and old graphite. Inside were her mother's brushes wrapped in linen, her loupe, her notebooks, a small, worn book of pigment recipes that her mother had copied out by hand from an Italian manuscript she had photographed in Florence in her 20s. Beatrix sat on her bedroom floor with the box open between her knees on a Saturday morning with the grey winter light pressing against the window, and she let herself cry for the first time in a very long time. Not for the long night, not for the vault, for her mother. For the years a woman had given to a craft the world had refused to pay her for. For the small, honest copies that had paid their rent. For the 1 or 2 dishonest ones that had probably saved their winters. For the daughter she had raised in that apartment in Boston, and the things she had taught that daughter to see, and the questions the daughter had not asked because she had thought there was time. There had not been time, there never was. With mothers, Beatrix put the box on her dining table after that, not back in the closet, on the table, where she could see it, where the brushes lay across the surface like a quiet promise to look at them, to use them if she wanted to learn, finally, what her mother had been teaching her all those years. She did not pick up a brush. Not that year, but she opened the notebooks. She read them, slowly, 1 page a night, the way you read a letter from a person you love who is no longer here. And the woman she had been taught by came back, sentence by sentence, in her own careful handwriting, across 30 years of notes on light, on pigment, on the small private griefs of a working painter. It was the best gift she had ever been given. She had simply needed to be in her 30s before she could open it. Damien was patient. That was the thing she had not expected. She had braced herself, in the early weeks, for the man she had seen on the staircase. The man with the holster and the lethal grace and the voice that filled a frescoed ceiling. She had braced for the possibility that he would arrive at her door with the same authority, that he would expect her, having been saved by him, to belong to him. He did not. He arrived. When he arrived, with food, he arrived with a small box from a bakery he liked on Mulberry Street. He arrived with a bottle of wine, never the most expensive one he owned, the right one for the meal he had asked the cook to send up. He arrived having texted first. He arrived having asked first. He arrived as a man who had clearly decided, somewhere along the way, that he was going to treat this woman the way she had told the ballroom she expected to be treated. Or he was not going to come at all, so he came on her terms. He came for dinner. He came for coffee. He came once, on a Sunday, for a long afternoon walk through Central Park, in which they spoke of almost nothing and looked at almost everything, and the sun came out for an hour, and Beatrix realized, walking beside him with her gloved hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, that she was happy. It was a small word, it was a small word, and she did not say it out loud. But she said it inside her own head 3 times, just to test it. Happy. Happy. It still fit. There was a night in early December when she asked him about Dorsey. She had not asked before. She had not wanted to. The morning of, in the small drawing room off the foyer, she had told him she was all right, and he had told her she had destroyed an expensive painting, and they had laughed, small, impossible laugh, and then they had not spoken of any of it again. But it had stayed with her. Not the act. She did not lose sleep over what had happened to a man who had stood outside her door and threatened her life. She had made her peace with that part. The world was the world. Some men chose their endings, and Dorsey had chosen his, and she did not have to carry it. What stayed with her was Damien. What stayed with her was a man who had loved his right hand for 20 years, who had stood in his own foyer at 5:14 in the morning and faced the man he had trusted absolutely, who had not turned away from what that had cost him. She asked on the night in early December. They were on her couch, the lamp on, the wine bottle half empty, the radiator clicking the way old radiators do. Damien. Yes, are you all right? He looked at her. He understood at once what she was asking. He always did. That was one of the things. I have done this a long time, he said. That's not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. She waited. He sat back into the couch. He looked for a moment. Much older than he was. Not weak, not tired, just older. The way a man looks when he has stopped pretending, even briefly, that the weight he carries is light. He loved me, Damien said, I think, in his way, and I loved him. In mine. We had been together since the first business I built. He held a position no one else could fill, and he chose, somewhere along the road, to begin to take from me. Slowly, patiently, with great care. Why, I don't know. I will not know. He did not leave a letter. Men like him rarely do. Perhaps he believed he deserved more. Perhaps he had a debt of his own. Perhaps the choice was made for him, somewhere, and the rest was simply momentum. She nodded. And you? He was quiet a long moment. I will not pretend it was easy. I will not pretend I am not changed. But I will tell you something I have told no one else. What I am grateful. She looked at him. For you, he said, for your eye, for your refusal to leave that ballroom on someone else's terms. For walking into my study at 4 in the morning and telling me what I had not been able to see for 10 years. He would have done worse, Beatrix. He had begun something that would not have ended with a Caravaggio. There were more pieces to it. I am still untangling them, and every thread, when I find it, I think. She stopped him. She stopped him before he could finish. She did this for me. She set her wine down. I did it for me, she said quietly. I know I did not do it for you. I know it happened to help you. But I did it because that man was standing outside my door telling me that my mother's student was working for him. And because I had spent my whole life being told I took up too much space, and because I had finally understood that night that I had always taken up exactly the right amount, I know, a long silence. He took her hand, he turned it over in his. He looked at the small ink stain on the side of her thumb, where her loop had pressed too hard during the Vermeer examination. He smiled, a very small smile, and lifted her hand and kissed the knuckle of her thumb, very gently, just once. I know, he said again. Good. I am still grateful. All right, for all of it, Damien. What? Eat your dinner, he laughed. It was the second time she had heard him laugh in her life. The first had been in the small drawing room off the foyer. The second was on a couch in an apartment on the third floor of an old pre-war building on East 86th Street. On a Tuesday in December, while the radiator clicked and a half-empty bottle of wine sat between them, and outside the windows the snow began, very softly, to come down. She did not know it then. But she would remember that laugh longer than any of the others. She would remember it on her flight to Madrid the following March. She would remember it during the long, quiet weeks at the Prado, examining canvases she had read about her whole life, finding 2 misattributions in the first month, and 1 outright forgery in the second, building the slow, careful reputation that would come to define the rest of her career. She would remember it on the night in April when Damien flew in to spend a long weekend with her in a hotel near the Plaza Mayor. When they walked the city late at night and the streetlights were warm and the wine was warmer still. When he told her simply, in a small bar 2 blocks from the cathedral, that he had begun to put the dangerous parts of his life down. Not all at once. He was honest about that. A man does not walk away from 20 years of one kind of life in a single afternoon, but slowly. Piece by piece, the legitimate shipping was real and could carry him. The other things, the ones his men referred to in careful sentences and unfinished verbs, were ending. He had begun the process. It would take years. It would not be clean. But it had begun. She had asked him why. He had looked at her across the small table, in the warm light of the small bar, and he had not said the thing she half expected him to say. He had not said for her. He had not said because he loved her. He had not made it her weight to carry. He had said something else, because I would like, before I am too old, to find out what kind of man I am when I am not afraid of who is coming for me. I have never met him. I would like to. She had nodded. She had reached across the table. She had taken his hand. They had drunk their wine. They had walked back to the hotel through streets that smelled of orange blossoms even in April. And the next morning she had gone back to her Goyas, and he had gone back to his city, and the long quiet work had continued, on both ends, of building a life together that did not require either of them to be smaller than they were. That was the year. That was the shape of the year that followed the long night in the house in Alpine. A box of brushes on a dining room table, a Vermeer in a Connecticut house, a pair of old people crying over their good news, a sabbatical in Madrid, a small bar 2 blocks from a cathedral, a man laughing twice, in the privacy of 2 different rooms, with the same woman in front of him, a woman who, when she stood in front of a mirror that year, did not flinch, a woman who, when she walked into a room, no longer counted the threads in the tapestry across the wall to keep herself from panicking, a woman who, on the last day of October, exactly 1 year after she had paid for half her own dinner at a small restaurant on the East River, sat down at her dining table, picked up one of her mother's brushes, dipped it carefully into a small dish of cadmium red, and made, on a clean, stretched canvas, a single mark, a small curl in the lower right corner, like a comma, like a wave, her own private joke, between her and the painting that did not yet exist on Radatzenfass, between her and the woman in Boston who had taught her how to look, between her and every cruel small voice that had ever told her she was too much. She set the brush down. She looked at the curl. She smiled, and then she stood up. She crossed her apartment. She picked up the phone Damien had given her, the new one, not the small black one from the vault, and she dialed the only number she still called in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. He picked up on the second ring. "Beatrix, Damien, what is it? Come to dinner. When? Tonight." A pause. A small one, the pause of a man checking his calendar in his head and discovering very quickly that nothing on it mattered more than the woman on the other end of the line. "I will come. Good. What are we having?" "I don't know yet, Beatrix." "Yes. Are you all right?" She looked across her apartment at the small curl in the corner of her canvas, the first mark she had ever made on a painting of her own, the mark her mother had used, the mark a student of her mother's had used, 11 years too late, on a forged Caravaggio in a vault. The mark that on her own canvas, on her own table, in her own light, was no longer a forger's secret. It was a daughter's signature. "Yes," she said. "I am very all right. Come to dinner." She hung up. She put the phone down. She picked up the brush again, and outside the windows of the apartment on East 86th Street, the late October afternoon began, very slowly, to turn gold, the way late October afternoons in New York sometimes do. As if the city had paused just for a moment to look in on a woman at a table and a single fresh mark on a canvas, and decide that this, of all the small private moments happening across its 5 boroughs, was worth one good, clear hour of light. She painted into the light. She painted until the light was gone, and when he arrived hours later, with a small box from a bakery he liked on Mulberry Street and a bottle of wine that was not the most expensive he owned, she opened the door to him in a paint-streaked sweater, and her mother's old apron, and the apartment behind her smelled of linseed oil and turpentine and bread, and he took one look at her, and he laughed, the third time, the best of them. He set the wine on the counter. He kissed her on the forehead. He looked across the room at the canvas on the easel and at the small fresh curl in the lower right corner, and he did not ask what it meant. He understood already. That was the other thing. She had found a man who understood, without asking, what a curl in the corner of a painting could mean to a woman whose mother had taught her how to see. She poured them each a glass of wine. She handed him his. And in the warm, small kitchen of an old apartment, on the 3rd floor of an old building, in an old neighborhood of an old city, 2 people who had each spent too many years being the wrong size for the rooms they were in, stood, finally, in a room that fit them both, no more, no less, and not 1 inch apologized for.